Getting out of an abusive relationship early makes a huge difference.
And I'm proud to say I did come in as a victim, but I am a survivor.
Then I could see my mom. My mom was walking toward us. And I got excited. And I was like, there's my mom. And then he didn't stop.
I'm trying to keep it together, I said. I gave in to the tears. And I hated that.
It's not necessarily the easiest process. It's not necessarily the prettiest process, but it is the most effective process. Like, you can do this. I'm going to tell you 100% you can do this, and you're so worth it to do this.
I'm sure losing any child is a real arrow through your heart, but you know, she was great. She was a friend and a family member and our daughter.
It feels just as good the 10th time as it did the first time, to have one of your citizens that you're out there protecting walk up and tell you thank you.
There is one thing stronger in me than fear, and that's my determination. Welcome back. This is Jen Lee, the creator and host of I Need Blue, Survivors Talk Surviving. Visit www.ineedblue.net for additional stories. As you listen, if the message moves you, share it with friends and family. The more we share, the more we learn, and the more we can help. Please note, I Need Blue does contain stories which feature graphic content and could be triggering. Please seek help if needed. Remember, you always come first. 4 years ago today, February 14th, 2018, a 19-year-old walked into Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. 4 years ago today. He opened fire, killing 17 people and injuring 17 others. The gunman, a former student, fled the scene on foot by blending in with other students and was arrested without incident about an hour later in nearby Coral Springs. The Parkland shooting, this killing spree, is the deadliest high school shooting in U.S. history. The perpetrator pleaded guilty and apologized, and his sentence will be determined this month. Today's guest, Dr. Michele Finneran, is an author, psychotherapist, and mental health advocate. Her expertise was called upon by some students from the Parkland shooting who were in need of coping and dealing with this unforeseen trauma. Survivors of the shooting, teachers and students alike, have struggled with survivor's guilt and other symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Today's discussion is about the discoveries Dr. Finneran learned while helping these victims navigate a new normal. The images, sounds, sights, and horror seen by innocent victims. Children, really. I'm sure, like me, many of you watch these crazy events unfold on TV, standing in disbelief at the images unfolding. Perhaps double-checking with your kids to make sure they were okay no matter what state or city you were in, or sending that I love you text as you were reminded how quickly life changes. Moments of fear and tragedy witnessed can have a devastating effect on one's life. Dr. Finneran is here to shed light on the depth of this trauma. She has helped some victims begin the journey of becoming survivors. Using traditional practices and some unique to her, she guides us through what the students witnessed that day and how professionals such as herself provide healing and coping tools to manage the trauma. I am honored to introduce Dr. Michele Finneran. Thank you for being my guest today.
Hi, my name is Dr. Michele Finneran. I have a business in Coral Springs, Florida called Beck & Associates. It's a private practice, a mental health clinical practice setting. I treat preteens, teens, adults, marriages, couples, families. My main focus in my practice is working with first responders. I work with law enforcement. I work with detectives. I work with firefighters. I work with nurses, paramedics. So I work with a lot of first responders. So I'm dealing with the people who are helping people, which I think is very important to help those people who are helping other people. I recently published a book last year called Surviving Domestic Abuse, Formal and Informal Supports and Services. And that can be found on Amazon and on Rutledge Taylor and Francis Company. I've been doing community mental health for about 22 years, 10 of which have been in community mental health, and 12 has been in my own private practice. So I've started very young and just seen a lot of changes in the mental health field and a lot of different trainings. And based on what society brings to the table, we have to adapt and adjust accordingly. My PhD is in conflict resolution and dispute analysis. So I work with municipalities, organizations, families, more than one entity when it comes to conflict or distress. So that's really my expertise in that as well. This is like the perfect profession for me. I knew really early on that this is something that I definitely wanted to get into.
And how did you know? Did something happen, or?
It kind of happened like when I was very young. My dad would talk to me about his life and his trauma at a very young age. And I didn't have, the coping skills or the techniques to kind of help him. And it was a little age inappropriate. But I just became like an empathetic listener. I wanted so much to help him. I felt his pain. And I just was always the type of person that people, I think, felt that they can come to talk about their issues or their problems. When I went to Stetson in my undergrad, I went to the crisis stabilization unit where I worked with really severe mental health clients that were in crisis. And I knew then there was such a feeling of like compassion for me, and working with people that are struggling. You also have to have empathy, and you also have to help them, which is the know how to, like how the techniques, the skills, the training behind the empathy. I think those two combinations make a really effective therapist.
What is the main form of practice that you have right now, or is it very diverse?
I'm more of a cognitive behavioral therapist, REBT. It's like a rational motive behavioral therapy. So making sure that the thought processes are healthy and in line in order to feel what you're thinking, in order to behave in what you're thinking and feeling. So it's all kind of transgressional. So much power in the mind, and there's so much power in our thoughts. It can create such a win-win situation. It can also create a paralyzing situation. So I really work cognitively on my clients to make sure that their thinking and perspective is healthy and that they're clear in order for them to feel a certain way, in order for them to act and behave a certain way.
What piece of advice would you give, say, a family who maybe has a teenager that's struggling?
I really do feel like putting down the technology, putting down the social media, and really like emotionally like checking in, like not just a surfacey check-in, but really like taking the time and talking to your teens, to your children is going to be really important. I think, there's teens, I feel like at times are left to their own devices, and that's dangerous. I feel like teens need the structure, they need the routine, they need the guidance, they need the monitoring. And I feel like a lot of them don't have that type of supervision, don't have that type of monitoring. So when you don't have that, it's almost like a free for all in their minds and in their behaviors. And, just being a teen is a hard age with everything happening biologically and hormonally. And I do suggest like having like a once a week, like sit down family meeting, not like a family dinner, but actually like a family meeting to talk about the week, to prepare for the week ahead, and to talk about any type of obstacles or barriers that their teens may be experiencing. I just really get into the thick of it, and, don't leave your teens to their own devices, because for too long, because they end up in trouble, and then we wonder why,
So tell me your experience when it came to the Parkland shooting.
as a person living right next to the community and a person that is treating a lot of members in the community, it really on a personal level, and not just a personal level, but also a professional level as a therapist, really shook me to my core. I mean, I just, when I went to school, Jen, I wasn't trained, I had to go get additional training on these types of catastrophes that happens in our society, because back when I went to school, there was no kind of education on how to handle a school shooting, how to help victims and families through this type of disaster. Having to take my own personal training in order to school myself on the traumatization of something like this happening, and seeing families and students that were impacted and in the building was just something that I can't even describe. I don't even know how to articulate it. It was something that I've never seen before and nothing I've ever experienced before, but it hit a very strong, kind of in like a different new chord with me that had never been struck before. Like, it was just a different type of takeaway and I've heard a lot of things and I've seen a lot of things, but I have never in my life been this close to home to it. And it really just shook me.
At what moment did you feel that initial, let's say, shake that shook you to your core?
The actual day that it happened. I was sitting there having counseling with her and her phone was blowing up in the session and she was looking at her phone and I'm like, and I says, everything okay? She's like, I don't know. I think something's happening with my child. I'm with my teen. I'm not really sure what's going on. She's like, I'm going to have to leave the session. Like, go take care of what, your child, your teen. So I knew something was going on that was not, it did not sit well with me, just based on my parents' expression and her vibe that I got, and just the amount of text that she was getting in the session. So then I went downstairs because I knew something was going on. I went downstairs into the lounge in my office and I turned on the news, and right there I was just like, it's something that I've never seen before. It was actually like the news in real time happening, and I couldn't take my eyes off of it. I was like, I cannot believe this is actually happening. And my patient was a parent of a child that was in Parkland. I think what I did is I canceled the rest of the day, just so I could kind of debrief myself on what was going on. It happened in the moment, and the law enforcement going in and students running out and everything that was on the news that was being reported was something that I will never, the feeling that I had that day in that moment with that parent and what we experienced together was something that I cannot, a new feeling that it cannot be diminished or eliminated from my core.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I didn't know that. Like, you literally experienced what a parent felt in that moment. You watched them and what they were going through the texts and the anguish and wow. I can understand how that shook you to the core.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I was in shock, and I followed up as time evolved with that parent. And to this day, 40 years later, can't even articulate as a therapist in that session with that parent. She just looks so incredibly frantic and scared.
Was her teen okay?
Yes, her teen was okay. A lot of teens weren't. A lot of teens were wounded. Teens and teachers and some administrators had passed because of the shooting. A lot of trauma was witnessed. A lot of trauma was felt, and during that day, whether you were in the building or not in the building, the aftermath of that, news reporters bombarding the school in kids' faces, teachers trying to navigate and help their students along with their own trauma, administrators trying to figure out how this even happened, almost like how did this even take place kind of thing. Families and teens that were part of the shooting really didn't seek out therapy until about a year later.
Wow, a year. I was going to ask you, when was the first time or how soon after?
It was about like 8 to 9 months, a year later.
That's a long time.
Yeah, well, I think that, when you first experience trauma, you're kind of like in shock and you're numb and you can't really feel. It took the students that long to kind of realize that there was something really big happening that was wrong. And I don't know if they couldn't really articulate specifically what that was, but their parents and they knew something was wrong based on that shooting that they were feeling. So I saw about 4, I want to say 4 in total, students and then parents that were impacted directly at the time.
So what was it like when the first student came to you for help?
What I did is I asked them to process. I feel when a person is traumatized, one of the things that a therapist needs to allow to happen is an ample amount of time for them to process the events that have taken place. So we spent a lot of time just on details of the events that have taken place and processing the things that they saw, the things that they felt, anything that they needed to process during and afterwards. The trauma just didn't happen on that day. The impact happened thereafter, with just the school being just bombarded with law enforcement and reporters and interviews and, services quickly being set up, community services being lifted and demonstrated at the time, which was great and very much needed. Crisis is over. People are still left with the trauma, and that's I feel like they were able to initially get help during those times when the crisis occurred, but then afterwards, after a year later, trauma is still there, and it's very much still a crisis for the victim internally that are going through that. So it's when they started really coming to with the feelings of unnumbing themselves and really feeling like, okay, there's something wrong here. I've been impacted and it's not kind of going away. So I think probably I need to seek some additional services.
Are you able to share, when the students came in, are you able to share some of the things that they told you in regards to what they saw and what they heard? I have to imagine they had to first cope with maybe what they saw, and then what they heard, and then what they smelled, and it probably one step at a time because it's so overwhelming. So can you share maybe some of the stuff that they had to unravel?
Yes. So in terms of what they heard, a lot of students heard the popping of the gun. They didn't really know what that was because they didn't understand what that was. And so they heard that, and they heard the fire alarm, which, people didn't think that it was kind of like a test run. Community really tried to be mindful of when fireworks were going off during the 4th of July or during New Year's, to try to reduce the amount of fireworks going off, as it very easily can trigger someone who has heard that type of popping from a gun. A lot of students were told to go into corners of the classrooms or in closets or under their desk and lock the door, kind of hide 4 hours at a time. And in the classroom, they started Googling and reading, in the moment. Now, I can't, as a therapist that's had skills and that's been through training, can't even imagine what a student might have felt like under a desk, and then looking up what is actually going on, as to why they're under the desk in real time. So, and this is a teenager. And that's the reason why it really just devastated the community and the surrounding communities around there because of the severity of the crime and the devastation and the emotional and physical and mental impact it had on everyone in that community. Imagine a perpetrator has entered into a school with a very large gun and has taken over the school, your school that you're in, and you're in danger. Students that I treated, what was traumatizing for them is like exiting out the school was traumatizing for them because you had law enforcement officers trying to get them out as quickly as possible, telling them, instructing them, do not look down, look straight ahead, don't look down, because what was on the ground was, obviously going to be an imprint on their mind forever. There was just a lot of blood, a lot of bodies, and law enforcement really tried to instruct them to look ahead and walk fast. And even law enforcement that I've spoken to, providing protection, have never seen this type of mass devastation and bloodshed and the time that they've been in law enforcement.
It's different when it's kids too.
Yes, definitely different. A lot of teens, they're feeling something, but because the feelings are so overwhelming, they don't know why they're feeling it. They don't know where it's coming from. They don't really know what exactly they might be feeling. Try to get in tune with what it is that you might be feeling, because I think it's a flood of feelings that come over, and it's hard to articulate for a teen trying to seek therapy to kind of figure out how to cope with their PTSD and their trauma that they've witnessed and they've experienced during that time.
So did the teens who, say, had been shut in the classrooms, did you find that they were having similar issues where they didn't want the door shut? Maybe they didn't want the lights off, things like that?
They couldn't sit in a classroom. They had a very hard time going back into the building of their school. Yeah. Forget about a door being shut or the blinds being closed or the lights being off. They had a hard time sitting in class. They just, I mean, that's how close it was for them. It was that traumatizing. A lot of the school had like therapeutic dogs out there because it was so hard for them to re-enter the school and having some sort of comfort, and as after it happened, there was services set up in the library at different places where kids can come in. Teenagers could come in and their families could come in. A therapist there on site. There was a multitude of therapists there on site to process what had just happened. And the services were put up really quickly and needfully so for the community and the parents and the students and the school and everyone who was involved.
How does a teenager deal with trauma versus an adult in the ways they handle trauma?
Just having them understand what they've been through. Talked about it like they were reading off of like a storybook and no emotion attached to it. They're just recollecting, trying to recall. It was bizarre because what they were recalling was something that was so incredibly tragic. But they were talking about it like they were reading from a book, like almost like autopilot, like not even attaching emotion to it. But they can't really articulate maybe why or how it's connected or even what they might be feeling, because again, it might be a flood of feelings. So when they recalled the events, it was awkward for me to hear it because what they were recalling was such trauma and devastation. They were talked about like they were telling a story, and they didn't understand how emotionally impactful these events are. And maybe that's the reason why they were experiencing such severe anxiety and such panic and such PTSD, and such nervousness.
The additional training that you got helped, but with some of your students, you took on an out-of-the-box approach to help them. Can you explain?
The training that was provided for me that I sought out to deal with the Parkland shooting was informative, but I created a certain technique that really helped my students, because what my students were really experiencing in the classroom is just pure 100% anxiety, and they could not calm themselves down. So when I was visiting my cousin in Ohio, she made these soothing rocks. I call them soothing rocks, and they're really like smooth. They're smooth and they're calming, and it's very relaxing when you touch them and you continuously rub them. It's a smooth, tactile, soothing kind of feel. And on the rocks is a positive kind of affirmation of strength, of courage, of, compassion. And so what I would do is when I would have a Parkland student come in and they were just having an immense amount of anxiety in the classroom, in the aftermath, I would tell them I have a big bowl in my office on my table, and I said, go through these stones and pick out which one you like, that feels good, that sounds good to you in terms of a saying. And they took the time and they went through all the stones and they picked, and I let them keep that. So anytime they go into an anxiety provoking setting, usually it was back into the school, they would rub this stone to give them comfort and reassurance. And it was kind of like you using senses that you typically don't use, which is touch. So that was, the feedback that I got from them was very, very helpful, that technique. And I learned that technique when growing up. My oldest brother was having a little separation anxiety from my mom, and my mom at the time said, I have a little paper clip I want you to put into your pocket, and anytime you miss me or anytime you think of me, I want you to touch the paper clip and know that when you do touch it, that I'm thinking of you. So I thought that was kind of like a really cool, and it did help him tremendously. It really helped him with the separation anxiety. So I thought that what a great kind of modality to use for students that get into the classroom setting, back into the classroom setting.
And have you used that on any other clients for other situations?
I have. Anyone who's dealing with something that has immense anxiety or like / trauma from from anxiety from the trauma, I do utilize that as a healthy reminder that you are strong, you are remarkable, you are beautiful, and I use it particularly on my teens and my young adults because they seem to really gravitate to that technique.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. Can you tell us how it impacted you?
Nothing like this has ever happened to me on a professional or personal level before. So it just really opened my eyes to really how our society is changing, and the psychological needs of people have changed. And not just, with this Parkland shooting and with shootings prior to and after the Parkland shooting, what society is now dealing with based on what I went to school with for 20 years ago. Obviously, times have changed, people change, society changes. As a therapist, you have to be keeping up with those times and keeping up with the events that take place in society and how it may, impact on a psychological, mental health level.
Mm-hmm. He is due to, based upon an article I read this morning, due to be charged this month. That's a long time. That's 4 years for that cloud to kind of be hanging over the community. So how is the community? How does this affect a community?
So many people in the community are feeling so many different things. There's not even one answer that would be an accurate response to that question. I feel that the community has a right to feel whatever they might be feeling. And I'm just guesstimating that there's a whole slew of things that they're feeling. That's a good question. I don't think there's one response to that question.
Mm-hmm. When the students talk to you, what were their thoughts and feelings about the perpetrator?
They didn't know him personally, and no one in this school, I don't know if anyone really knew him because he wasn't a part of the school. He had graduated from the school. I don't know if there was any type of familiarity with Nicholas Cruz from the student standpoint because of that.
I know we were going to talk about what it's like for a survivor to testify. Do you have thoughts on that?
I just would probably assume seeing the perpetrator in a court setting, what that that flooding, that's a flooding of emotions. And, it's to testify is my gosh, what a strong, brave, courageous thing to do. But also there's no level of emotional preparedness that could happen when you do testify, and you obviously are getting re-victimized and you're seeing the perpetrator in the courtroom. There's no level of preparedness that you can have emotionally until it actually happens.
And that's true because I had to go to court to testify against our perpetrator. And you feel like a victim over and over again. And it's very hard because you have to recall the details. The ultimate goal is you want to put this perpetrator in jail for as long as you can so that they can't hurt anybody else. And I will tell you that they are going to need as much support during this time. And even those who aren't testifying but are aware and hear the details of what's going on, it's going to trigger things. And they need your support. Yeah, they need your support just as much now as they did then.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else that you want to share today? You've given a lot of insight. I've really enjoyed getting to know you.
The one piece of advice that I would tell also parents, there's no book on how to be a good parent, and there's definitely not a guide on how to help navigate your teen through a mass school shooting. People right now just need people. People need people, and they need people that are going to be compassionate and loving, whether it be a formal support, whether it be a law enforcement officer, whether it be a therapist, whether it be an agency that deals directly with the crisis of the Parkland shooting. They just need people that have compassion and that are going to be able to be supportive with them, show the love and compassion non-judgmentally to the community, to the people that have experienced and were directly and indirectly impacted by this.
And encouraging others to get help.
Encouraging others to get help. And for those students that I saw, I was just a big act of bravery. Just coming to terms with something's wrong. And I think it's connected to this. And parents that are progressive and proactive with their teens' mental health. I mean, the community really tried and did band together. It's a very close community, and it's a very, very compassionate community. It's always has been, but more so now than ever. And I think that's something that is much needed going forward.
Absolutely. It proves that we, in times of need, we are always there for each other. And the goal is to always be there for each other when it's not a major time of need in traumatic situations like that. Because like you said, people need people.
People need people that are able to help and just are able to listen and have the compassion.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes that is exactly it. They just want somebody to listen. They don't want you to fix it. They don't want you to try to dissect it or anything. They just want to be able to talk and talk and talk and talk and feel like that is welcome and that they're not burdened when they talk.
Exactly. And I think that is probably the biggest fear I think teens might have, is that they're going to be left feeling like they are a burden, and they're fearful that their parents are going to worry about them. But when parents are like progressive and encourage them to speak up and speak out and talk to them, I think is extremely helpful, knowing that they are not a burden and they're always an open ear, willing ear. And sometimes the parents don't know how to help, and so that they themselves get the help for their child and for their teen, which is, again, knowing what you can and can't do as a friend, as a parent, takes a level of awareness,
Yep. So by being there for each other and relying on professionals such as yourself is very important. So I thank you for all you do.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jen. I really do appreciate it. I appreciate, the type of podcast that you have out and how educational it is and informative. And, definitely, when you have a sensitive topic such as this, is definitely making your audience aware that this is a sensitive topic. And, it may be triggering. So if you feel like you're going to be triggered, then maybe wait until you're more emotionally ready to hear the episode. So I think that is also compassionate and careful as you have on your podcast.
Exactly. Yes, that's important. I would like to thank my special guest, Dr. Michele Finneran. Your experience, and more so your compassion, creates an environment for survivors to feel safe in opening up. It takes a lot of courage to take that first step. As a survivor myself who believes in the healing process of therapy, I thank you for all you do. For many survivors, talking about the incident is the first step to healing. I would like to invite any survivor of a school shooting to reach out and share their story on I Need Blue. If you feel sharing would help, by all means, the floor is yours when you are ready. I would like to thank the listeners, those new and those who continue to listen to the messages. If you feel inclined to support the message via sponsorships or advertisements within the episode, visit www.ineedblue.net for details. This is Jen Lee, survivor advocate, creator, and host of I Need Blue podcast. Remember, you are stronger than you think.